Hey, this is the Monster back with another comic review. Today I wanted to talk about the 2021 Authority reboot, Superman and the Authority. This comic is bad and it doesn't work. As a fan of the previous incarnation of the Authority, this story undermines pretty much everything the previous team stood for. It's a pale imitation and includes so many characters acting out of character for the sake of the story that it's hard to read. The story takes place after the events of Infinite Frontier, where every previous DC story is supposed to be canon, which makes suspending my knowledge of these characters and their choices even more difficult, but maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's just break down the so-called story, because it can barely be called that, and piece together its problems as they go along. This book serves as more of an origin story than an actual story arc for the team. It reads like an extended flashback, so don't go reading this like I did expecting anything to be resolved, because it's really not. You literally have to go and track down some issues of Superman if you want to know where the plot lines in this go, and frankly it's extremely anti-consumer. It's books like this that make me understand why comics are so niche, because a paying customer shouldn't have to put up with this. Issue 1 opens up with super criminal Manchester Black being hunted down by a Black Ops group that is armed with anti-psychic technology attempting to kill him. After a brief skirmish, Manchester Black is shot through the spine. At that point, Superman flies in and demands to take Manchester back with him, and for some unexplained reason, the soldiers comply. There are so many problems with this scene if you just sit down and think about it for a second. First, did Superman know this attack was going to take place? Because these soldiers were shooting to kill, so what would he have done if Manchester Black had died? You find out shortly after that Superman is weakened, so it's unlikely he could have intervened if he didn't know about this, but it's really convenient that Manchester Black almost died, because it could be argued that the big reason Manchester even goes along with Superman's plan to form the Authority is because Superman saved his life. I also feel the need to point out that the sequence of the Manchester Black attack is pretty strange. For one, seems like their main soldier isn't wearing his psi helmet for some reason, so Manchester Black immediately gets an attack off against them. And that just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Like, why would a single trained soldier, especially the commander, not be wearing his psi helmet to attack one of the most powerful telepaths in the DC universe? And another thing, Manchester Black doesn't just have psychic powers, he has telekinetic powers. The ability to interact with objects with his mind. So I'm actually wondering, how did they manage to snipe him? He saw the shooters, so why didn't he just activate a telekinetic force field? Conventional weaponry isn't a concern of Manchester Black. I suppose, again, you have to maybe assume that these are like anti-psi bullets or something, but that isn't presented to us in the narrative, so I'm kind of just doing the author's work for them here. Like, within reason, Manchester Black should have handled this encounter pretty handily. Furthermore, it seems like Superman is pretty bent on letting Manchester Black lead the team. So again, if he knew about this attack, shouldn't he have done something a bit more to stop this? The timing is, again, just a little too perfect, but hey, every story gets one Deus Ex Machina, so let's just continue. The next issue opens with Superman trying to convince Manchester Black to help him, and it becomes incredibly apparent that this team up was not well thought out in the slightest. To understand this problem, you have to understand Manchester Black's character, and surprisingly, I think the authors understand this character pretty well, which is why the decisions come off as completely contradictory to the dialogue. Manchester Black is an anti-hero who created a team called the Elite that had a very similar perspective on how to handle crime to the Authority. They were a super team that was willing to kill any villain that it comes across. And in that sense, I do think Manchester Black is a good choice for an updated team roster, but it's everything surrounding this character in this plot that just makes it so that I can't get behind it. The philosophy of the Elite is completely antithetical to Superman's worldview, so the idea that he would look to Manchester Black for aid is honestly laughable. He tries to convince Manchester Black that he is needed to help save the world by telling him that sociopathic killers are going to break through the Phantom Zone and he can't stop them alone. Manchester Black correctly points out that he is one of those sociopathic maniacs as well, which brings up even more questions as to why Superman would even think of working with him. Manchester Black openly states that he will betray Superman given the chance after he already agreed to help him. He also points out that he tried to kill Superman's family multiple times, so why would Superman want to work with him? Superman states that he has always disliked Manchester Black, so again, why did he ask for his help? The idea that there aren't equally strong or reliable superheroes than Manchester Black that want to work with Superman is proven in the next issue. So that, again, brings me back to the point. Why? And if you ask me, the reason is because he's British. More specifically, it's because he has a Union Jack on his chest, just like the iconic leader of the Authority, Jenny Sparks. One of my biggest gripes I have about this comic is its insistence on filling roles of the previous Authority members without actually bringing back the original characters. It makes me think back to the Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite controversy, where developers stated characters are functions and that as long as you keep functions in the game, no one will care if the character changes. That mentality is completely false, and the rapid decline of that game only served as proof of that. Since the only reason they want Manchester Black is to fill Jenny Sparks' role, they have the right around his inclusion, even though his relationship with Superman isn't strong enough to make it believable. It defies logic, and the rest of the story isn't much better. Of course, Manchester ends up helping Superman with the Phantom Zone attack, and at the end of the issue, Manchester ends up making a call to Midnighter and Apollo to see if they want to join the team. Issue 2 starts with 5 pages of a weakened Superman exercising. This clearly comes off as padding to me because Manchester could have easily chatted with Superman while he exercised, but we had multiple pages of no dialogue instead, and then only get a brief chat between Superman and Manchester before the story breaks off in the short snippets of what the future team members are doing. The first short is probably the worst. I can't find any word to describe it other than cringe. I feel like the title page says it all. ADHD's a superpower too? Like, literally, what the heck? First of all, it's not. It's a real condition. You shouldn't be comparing it to a superpower. Second of all, that's just not a natural line anyone would say, and it makes no sense to bring up in the current situation she's in, because the only other person in the room is her uncle, who knows that she has ADHD, so why would you say that out loud? That's just weird. I'm not trying to disrespect ADHD, and it's nice to include characters with different conditions, but this is introduced with no tact and clearly shows they aren't interested in showing how that impacts their life, because stating it is the only time you see that impact her in any way in the rest of this book. But what's actually going on here? Well, it turns out her uncle was exploring the data cosmos, and the data life forms used his mind as a bridge to break through, so now Natasha has to beat them back, aka steal. I understand this is fiction, but this is stupid. Anyone with any education knows that data isn't sentient, and the depiction of these net-based entities is so juvenile. The first ones you see are clickbait manifested as an endless horde of robots that spout out a bunch of lies. I have 2 problems with this. One is this line that simply says, "Don't trust anyone that says they know what they're talking about." That's just a bad sentiment to put out into the world when we know misinformation is something plaguing society today, and you have to trust somebody. My second issue is that she calls it clickbait and not straight up misinformation, when everything they are saying is clearly a lie. While I can discern that if this is intended for a child or a younger audience, maybe they should take a second to make the distinction more clear, because clickbait is anything that gets you to click on a topic, and clickbait can be true, but what they're referencing here is clickbait in the form of misinformation, which is arguably a separate issue, because misinformation is the proliferation of something that is provably false. The next foe she takes on are body-shaming internet trolls that appear as literal trolls. That's stupid is my only comment there. She then fights edgelords, and the designs look like a cross between Green Goblin and the Eternals, and I can't decide if this is supposed to be a dig at Marvel, but honestly, I don't think they were thinking too deeply about it, so I guess I won't either. She pretty handily takes care of them, and that's basically the end of the short. Natasha Irons is another stand-in character who's supposed to take the place of the Engineer. The Engineer was a very versatile character that could do a lot more than the typical Iron Man, so it does disappoint me to see her replaced. Especially since this is a legacy character that I don't know a ton about, and all we get is this little short that literally tells us nothing other than that she has ADHD. The next short gives you a diet Midnighter and Apollo. Honestly, I wish they wouldn't have named the short Hard. I don't feel like adding an innuendo is necessary, especially when it doesn't even really describe the short, because it's not hardcore or particularly difficult for the characters to handle, so it just seems like a joke that's in bad taste. This short depicts Midnighter in character at least, openly saying he will kill all the soldiers, and does give you a taste of his power set, including his super speed and calculated fights, but the action is so PG that it barely feels like a Midnighter story. I'm sure Midnighter did kill those men, but they only show them going to the ground, which again brings back to the thought that maybe this is really intended for younger readers, and they don't want to offend them with the amount of gore Midnighter is known for. But again, if that's the case, maybe don't revive the Authority in a Superman comic. Like, I'm not a big fan of Apollo in this story, on the other hand. I'll admit not being an expert on Apollo's characters, especially the younger blonde version, but he comes off as pretty insecure about his relationship with Midnighter, and one of his defining traits on the Authority was his abundance of confidence in everything he does. He was separated from Midnighter in later issues of the Authority and in the New 52 Midnighter solo series, and never really expressed any concern about Midnighter cheating or sleeping with other people, and it feels a little bit out of his character for someone dripping in confidence to be concerned about things like that. Also, while I think it's fair to say that Apollo isn't as crazy about killing as Midnighter is, he's definitely not opposed to it. But maybe I could believe this is a version of the character that's slightly more against it, so I'm probably nitpicking. The story ends with them joining up with Manchester and Superman, and then transitions into another short about Enchantress. The Enchantress short was interesting. It had a good style that invoked horror, but again, some of the dialogue is just off, with the dark Enchantress side of the character starting to blurt out curse words out of nowhere when nobody else in the issue was cursing, really breaking the tension. You find out all of the horrors you're seeing seem to be something she created herself to punish herself, possibly. She's being tormented by some demon with a crazy name. I can't tell if he's real or just something the Enchantress made up, or both. Either way, it's still probably the most well-formed chapter in the entire book. You actually see the gathered members act as a team to break her out. Steel breaks down the situation while fighting alongside Midnighter and Apollo to fend off hordes of demons, while Superman and Manchester focus on breaking June Moon out. Manchester isn't really with the group and is only projecting his mind to the combat area, which is actually a really cool concept. He's able to talk June into accepting her darker side and recognizing that she is the Enchantress, which was a good character moment. June finally recognizes the truth and is able to free herself and feel whole again. I think narratively this is the most fully formed backstory, and it's easy to see why she would feel indebted to the team, unlike the other members. But again, this character falls into the trap of being a replacement. Enchantress is another character who's replacing an original member of the Authority known as the Doctor, who is the Authority's Sorcerer Supreme. He had his own interesting lore based on his lineage as the Shaman, and introducing the Enchantress could have been okay if they planned to do something interesting, like have a nuanced take on living with schizophrenia, or just dealing with more mental health issues, but of course they don't really seem that interested in doing that, since for the most part she seems pretty stable after this story. So I just feel like she's a missed opportunity. The last two members that they try to recruit actually break the story off into what I would consider the only traditional story arc in this book, but again, not fully formed. Leah Nelson, also known as Light Ray, is seen in a deep depression about the current state of the world and the pressure to always have to put out a positive image. She is on the brink of committing suicide when Eclipso abducts her, and Apollo and her cyborg guardian Omac have to figure out how to rescue her. The other team members are confronted by another stupid team, and even more cringe ensues. Steel and Midnighter have to decapitate a literal white supremacist who is unkillable, and Coldcast tries to take out his former leader to no avail because he doesn't have anything to actually stop psychic attacks, so he really should have even tried. Midnighter goes hand to hand against another cybernetically enhanced lesbian, and somehow they do manage to bring up their sexuality in the fight in the most forced way possible and make a dumb NFT joke that probably isn't going to age well. And I'm mostly just wondering why. What made them think this was a good story? After dealing with the white supremacist, Steel gets swept into another battle with a character who's made up of living energy, who is in this fight to the death with a superhero just to raise awareness of her country's plight, which makes zero sense because the fight isn't exactly televised. And what is killing the superhero supposed to accomplish exactly? It's not really made clear. So it just seems like much of the dialogue and plot are just really poorly thought out. And while that's going on, Superman is attacked by the Ultra Humanite in the body of Grundy. Ultra Humanite apparently wants to implant his brain in Superman's body, even though he is overpowering Superman and Grundy's body. So his plan doesn't really make a lot of sense, but I'll give the villain a pass for just being crazy. It did lead to a good moment of Lois Lane saving Superman with a Kryptonia weapon, and I always like seeing characters who are weaker on paper getting moments to shine like this. Superman then finds out that this is all some convoluted plan by Brainiac, and Brainiac is the one who orchestrated his team to fight the supervillain team. Then we see Enchantress jump into the conflict with Eclipso and save Lightray by magicking the gun away, which I feel like may take away from something as serious as suicide, because those thoughts can't simply be magicked away. But luckily Apollo is literally Eclipso's weakness, so he just takes him out with his light energy, saving Lightray from his influence. Because apparently we're just going to boil down her whole depressive episode as the influence of a supervillain. That's just great writing. But there isn't even a satisfying conclusion to this conflict, because Superman basically takes his team to another planet and leaves Brainiac and Ultra Humanite completely unchecked at the end of the issue. We don't even get to see what Light Ray could do, and no time is given discussing her attempted suicide, and that just doesn't seem right to me. She's also another stand-in character that seems to be replacing Swift on the original team. Swift was the Authority's speedster, and Light Ray's design and the brief snippet we see from her social media presence implies that she will cover the role of the super speedster. And that just leaves Omak, who by process of elimination is probably a stand-in for Hawksmoor. Superman himself would be a more appropriate comparison, because Hawksmoor is a self-proclaimed god and Superman has been called as such by other civilians and heroes alike, but as the title suggests, he's not really a member of the team proper, and it's not expected that if the Authority were to continue, that Superman would continue to be in it. So Omak must fill that role. So far, the only similarity I see to Hawksmoor is the super strength and being a product of science, which I guess is enough to make the connection, I suppose. The story ends with Superman gathering up the team and boarding the ship to World to fight Mongol. If it feels abrupt, that's because it is. And by the end of it, Brainiac and Ultra Humanite haven't actually been defeated, and I would argue that based on the context of this story, they pose a more immediate threat to Earth. Maybe Warworld is doing something that needs more immediate action, but if that's the case, a quick speech bubble rehashing exactly why they need to leave right away would have been appreciated. But I guess that brings me to my closing thoughts on this. Don't waste your money on this story arc. If you're expecting a revival of one of the best superhero teams like I was, you'll be sorely disappointed. Like I mentioned before, characters aren't just functions. A character is a collection of the experiences they've had on the page and the personality writers have imparted in those works. This is why people are fans of Barry Allen over Wally West or Hal Jordan over John Stewart. If you're going to swap out a team's roster, the criteria should feel like more than just having the same power set. They need to offer something emotionally or dramatically to justify their inclusion. And while there are hints of that in the story, most notably with Light Ray's suicidal thoughts and Enchantress's identity issues, it could be argued that the author maybe intends to see those issues as resolved, since there's no hint that these issues are going to recur or come up in the later stories. The dramatic traits of the other characters like Steel's ADHD or Omak's gender identity don't really seem to be impacting them, so I question what they could add to any narrative that follows. The story barely works as a team origin because you have to turn a blind eye to all of the out-of-character depictions like Manchester Black, who has every reason to hate Superman agreeing to lead the team, Midnight and Apollo agreeing even though killing isn't on the table, and it's never truly stated why Omak and Light Ray except this dangerous mention. The Authority is also known as being a mature book, and I already knew to expect it to be a little bit more tame given that Superman is on the title, but I think the story hasn't quite pinned down its audience. If it is for mature readers, don't shy away from the gore. And if you consider this to be for a younger audience, suicide and murder are pretty heavy topics to include in the book, so I don't know who they expect to be reading this series. If you've read this series and followed up on what they're doing in Action Comic, definitely leave me a comment below so I can see if it's worth checking out, because at this moment, this book did not convince me that I should pick that up. It's also not easy to follow up on the story if you're only interested in more Authority at the time of this recording, because it drops the Superman Authority title and continues in Action Comics and its insane numbering system that's currently in the hundreds. So do yourself a favor, just go read the 1999 run because it still holds up today, and if you want a preview of what makes that a great read for a mature audience, take a look at my previous video on the Authority. That's all for today, and if you found this review helpful, remember to like and subscribe for more content, and I'll put more out in the future. Thanks.